Welcome to the deep dive. I want to start today with a challenge, a question for you. What is the great Latin American literary equivalent to the epic Chinese family saga, Dream of the Red Chamber?
It really seems like a pure literature question, doesn't it? But that answer and, the path to finding it is actually the key to unlocking the really volatile global landscape of 2026.
That's right. Our mission today is to connect that literary quest, this idea of a long historical collapse captured in fiction, directly to the immediate hard power crises we're seeing in Latin America this year.
Specifically, the shocking events in Venezuela and, of course, the rising tensions in Panama.
We're basically connecting the grand historical forces hidden in old literature to today's strategic competition.
And we are synthesizing a fantastic stack of sources for this one. We've got literary comparisons, detailed geopolitical analysis of what happened in January 2026, and a really deep look at U.S. and Chinese long-term strategies.
All filtered through what we're calling the Kissinger-style lens.
Exactly. It's history, literature, and realpolitik all woven together.
Okay, so let's start with the literature, because the scale of this is so important. If you haven't read Dream of the Red Chamber, it is massive, a multi-generational chronicle.
But it's so much more than just a story.
Right. It's an exercise in social commentary, it's full of symbolism, and it's this devastating emotional exploration that mirrors the entire rise and the eventual crushing collapse of the Jia clan.
It's basically the downfall of a dynasty disguised as a family memoir.
So the quest is for an equivalent. We need a work that captures that same blend of, dynastic pride, historical doom, symbolic depth, and ruin, all focused on one family.
And the sources are very clear on this.
They are. The overwhelming choice. The work that truly captures that scope, that decay, that blend of myth and real history in one family's story is.
Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude.
Of course. That work is it's overwhelming in its scope, a lot like Red Chamber. It feels less like a novel and more like a historical fever dream.
Exactly. Solitude follows the Buendia family for a whole century in the fictional town of Macondo. It blends history, the absurdities of daily life, powerful myths, and this inescapable social and political decay.
So just like the Jia clan's collapse, the Buendias are doomed by their own nature and the forces of history.
Precisely. If Red Chamber is about dynastic fall, then Solitude is about the slow, sad decline of post-colonial Latin American society, all mirrored in one family. It's the perfect analog.
And that's the bridge, right? These sagas describe a long, slow, painful collapse over decades. But the current sources show a very different kind of collapse happening today.
Something much faster. Shock, speed, immediate intervention.
There are other examples cited too, though.
Right, things like Isabel Allende's At the House of the Spirits, which also has that family as microcosm of the state theme, and Doña Barbara in Venezuela,
A classic.
which is a deep dive into society and power. But Solitude is the one. It's the closest we get to that fully contained, highly symbolic epic that really defines Red Chamber.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We are leaving the world of literary sagas and jumping right into the hard power reality of January 2026.
And the sources paint a picture of a geopolitical shockwave in Venezuela, that is. It's almost unparalleled in recent history.
Startling doesn't even begin to cover it.
No. We're talking about a massive unilateral show of force. The U.S. conducted large-scale strikes on January 3rd, 2026. But the real shock, the thing that defines this, is the capture of President Nicolas Maduro
By U.S. forces.
by U.S. forces, flown immediately to the U.S., and then appearing in a New York federal court just 48 hours later on January 5th.
The speed is what strikes me. If the sagas show decay over a century, this is strategic collapse in a weekend. A sitting head of state captured and put before a judge, it's just unprecedented.
It's a profound hard power signal. Internally, Venezuela declared a state of emergency. Delcy Rodriguez took over as acting president, but the implication is clear.
A dramatic return to overt U.S. assertiveness in Latin America.
Absolutely. It destabilizes everything and throws the whole Monroe Doctrine back into the spotlight.
But wait a second, doesn't an action like that, even if it's against a hostile regime, doesn't it kind of contradict the U.S. goal of preserving an open economic order? Wouldn't Kissinger see this as a huge overreach that destabilizes the very balance you want to maintain?
That is a crucial point, and analysts are divided. On one hand, yes, it's a decisive move against a regional troublemaker.
Sure.
But on the other, it creates diplomatic chaos. It forces countries to question international law. It's definitely prioritizing regional security over those abstract institutional norms. It's a signal.
Now contrast that sudden shock in Venezuela with the the rising grinding tension in Panama.
A very different situation. Panama holds the most vital strategic choke point in the region, and it's dealing with the U.S.-China squeeze.
President Jose Raul Mulino is trying to walk a tightrope.
He really is. Their economy is all about logistics and trade, so they're vulnerable to both U.S. security pressure and Chinese economic influence. The material even points to an incident in 2025 where Mulino alleged the U.S. threatened visa revocations over Panama's ties with China.
And yet, Panama is still a central piece of the global economic puzzle.
Absolutely. They hosted the CAF International Economic Forum in 2026. For anyone who doesn't know, CAF is the Development Bank of Latin America. Hosting that just underscores Panama's role as a hub for finance and development.
Which is exactly why they're ground zero for this competition.
Precisely. So
Yeah.
you have Venezuela, the hard power hammer blow, and you have Panama, the long-term economic and diplomatic vice.
And the synthesis here is that Latin America is no longer some peripheral concern. It's being pulled back into the great power competition.
Countries are being forced to choose sides, or, as in Venezuela's case, they're simply forced to capitulate. The strategic importance of the Panama Canal just ratcheted up several notches.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. The shocks we're seeing, the capture in Venezuela, the pressure in Panama, they aren't random. They're symptoms of this profound accelerating competition.
And to understand it, you really need to view U.S. and Chinese grand strategy through this Kissinger-style lens.
Which forces us to look beyond the day-to-day headlines.
Right, and focus on deep structural goals that don't change with elections. The fundamental goal in this framework is to prevent any single power from dominating the whole system, to maintain a balance.
So if balance is the goal, how do the core ambitions of the U.S. and China stack up?
Well, they're inherently points of friction. The U.S. core goal is to preserve its global leadership, maintain its alliance network NATO, the Indo-Pacific partners, and secure the open economic order.
Which is tied to the dollar system.
Inextricably. China's core goal, though, is to regain centrality in Asia, ensure the party's stability at home, and expand its global influence gradually. They have very long planning horizons.
So the U.S. wants to maintain the status quo it built, and China wants to redefine centrality. That sounds inherently zero-sum, a term that's all over the source material.
It is. And zero-sum just means that strategists on both sides are starting to see a gain for the other as a direct loss for themselves.
If China gains influence in Panama, the U.S. loses.
Exactly. If the U.S. intervenes in Venezuela, China's economic efforts there are hampered. And that framing is precisely what Kissinger always warned against, because it just drives you toward confrontation.
Let's talk about their strategic styles, because
Right.
that contrast is so stark.
It's vital. The U.S. approach is often flexible, fast, reactive. It's shaped by short-term political cycles. You know, the next election is always coming.
Whereas China's approach, because of the party's continuity, is gradual, state-driven, and relies on what the sources call strategic patience.
A planning horizon of decades, or even a century. That's a massive advantage. But America's advantage is still its profound institutional weight, the power of the dollar, its alliances, its place in the global system.
The analysts seem to agree that both sides are risking escalation with this zero-sum framing.
They are. The critical takeaway from the Kissinger perspective is that the current path isn't sustainable. The strategic win, the ideal, is shifting toward managed rivalry.
Managed rivalry with guardrails. What does that actually mean? What kind of practical mechanism keeps you from open confrontation after a move like the one in Venezuela?
Guardrails are protocols, formal and informal. Things like open military communication channels to prevent accidents, clear agreements on non-interference in certain economic areas.
And maybe shared understanding on things like climate change or pandemics.
Right, areas where you cooperate no matter what. The goal is for the U.S. to compete without forcing everyone into rigid camps, and for China to rise without triggering a massive coalition against it. It's a high-wire act.
And that idea of long-term planning, that's the perfect bridge back to our sagas. If China plans its strategy over 50 years, what's a better example of long-term planning than an author coding 20 years of history into a masterpiece designed to survive for centuries?
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? We've covered the immediate crises, the grand strategy. Let's go back to Dream of the Red Chamber and unlock this other layer, this idea of it being a deeply coded 17th century historical document.
This takes us into the world of the Dianlin theory. It's a school of thought that argues the novel is not fiction. It's an encrypted history of the Southern Ming period, that chaotic 20 years from about 1642 to 1662.
So the theory is that the author documented 87 specific historical figures and 184 verifiable events, all hidden beneath a romance story.
An encrypted political history disguised as a love story. The risk, the dedication, it's incredible.
How did the author, Kaosuken, even pull that off?
Through structural codes, like multiple layers of encryption. One of the most important is the character system, which uses 4 rhyming systems of surnames as identity tags.
Okay, lay it out for us.
First, you have the Huaflower names. They symbolize the intellectuals, the scholars. Then, the Saida families, the great families like Jia and Zhu representing the rulers, the aristocracy, the ones destined to fall.
Okay.
Third is the King Emotion family, symbolizing the loyalists to the old Ming dynasty. And finally, the Li Flow system, which represents the common people, the Ming remnants who just sort of flow through the crisis.
And those 4 systems rhyme as Hua Si King Lu.
Which literally means Chinese civilization dies, but sentiment flows. The true intent of the book is right there in the structure.
Incredible. And what about the gender code?
Oh, that's essential. The famous line, "Women are made of water, men are made of mud," is the key. In the code, females symbolize specific individual historical figures. Males symbolize institutions or collective groups, like an army or the court.
Person versus institution. That's a critical distinction. And the novel itself gives you the key to its own encryption.
It does. It's the Wind Moon Treasure Mirror. The mirror is the decoding tool. The beauty and romance on the front of the mirror reflect the bloody political reality on the back.
So a sex is war, love is enslavement.
And the family falling apart reflects the downfall of the Ming dynasty, revealing white bones like mountains on the other side. It's a mechanism for deliberate historical tragedy.
Wow. And the history it covers is just that tight 20-year window.
But here's the most profound layer. The reason standard literary analysis misses it. The dual reality paradox. The main character, Jia Baoyu, has a shifting identity. He's coded to represent both the young King Shunzi Emperor when writing about the Inner Palace.
And the Southern Ming Yongli Emperor when writing out the resistance.
Yes. The protagonist is 2 different emperors at the same time, depending on which historical stream the author is detailing in that chapter. It's a genius way to hide in plain sight.
The ultimate move against censorship.
It is. The dream of the 2 Baoyus, where he dreams of his double, reflects a real historical event, the 1645 North-South Prince crisis. That whole true is false, false is true dynamic is the lock on the encryption.
So, what a journey. We started with a literary question, witnessed geopolitical shockwaves in 2026, the capture in Venezuela, the chokehold in Panama. We analyzed the grand strategy driving it all, and then found this massive, hidden historical saga coded into a 300-year-old novel.
And the sources show us that history, whether it's a sudden hard power event or a centuries-long dynastic change, is always being distilled into these powerful, often coded narratives. Red Chamber shows that great historical shifts, like the U.S.-China tension today, are ultimately transformed into epic stories through structure, symbol, and deliberate strategic coding.
So as you think about the strategies we discussed today, the Kissinger imperative for managed rivalry, the need for long-term planning, think about this. If today's great power competition accelerates this global power shift, what specific events or relationships from 2026, from Caracas to the Panama Canal, might be coded into the next great tragic literary saga centuries from now?
What symbols are being written into history right now that only future generations will be able to decrypt?
That's something to mull over.